You are good to start.
Hey guys, so in this class, we studied how microbes affect our everyday lives and how cultures made by fermentation, both in the microbial world and in the human world, impact the world we see today. Part of this course, we individually explored a fermented food and how the two cultures merged together with the specific dish we chose. Fermentation has sculpted and impacted our life as we know it, and in my class, we are excited to share with you how the specific foods we chose relate to the theme of this course.
All right, so fermentation is present pretty much everywhere in our diet. Some of the fermented foods that we eat on a daily basis include chocolate, pickles, sausage, sauerkraut, bread, yogurt, coffee, cheese, and alcohol. And as far as we can tell, fermented foods have been a part of the human diet for thousands of years. It started as a way of preserving food, but the strange, strong flavors that fermentation creates means that it's become an important part of our culture and cuisine. So what is fermentation? At a biological level, fermentation is a chemical change caused by enzymes that are produced by bacteria that either occur naturally or are introduced by people. Over time, mostly through trial and error, we figured out which bacteria cause chemical changes that are beneficial and that make our food more edible instead of less edible. We've cultivated strains of bacteria that work in ways that benefit us, and a lot of these strains can't be found in the wild because they exist purely in human spheres. At a simpler level, fermentation is transformation. We create a culture, a specific environment that is catered to the needs of a certain type of bacteria or a certain community of bacteria. When we take a step back and sooner or later, we have something that's completely different than what we started with. A fermentation success, so whether it results in a dish that's more flavorful and nutritious than before or a rotten mess, is dependent on its environment. The microbes that drive the change need the right conditions to be allowed to survive and need to be fed in order to thrive. It's not a super exact science. Sometimes a small deviation in technique can mean failure. And sometimes a bacterial culture can bounce back from catastrophe. So a fermentation success depends on the resiliency of the bacteria just as much as it depends on the environment. Each of us has studied an example of a fermented food, and we're about to share the basics of how each of these foods are made. Some of them you'll have heard of before, and some of them will probably be completely new to you. So we'll start with soy sauce.
Soy sauce is used in many dishes all across Asia. To make it, wheat is toasted and soybeans are steamed, and then both are boiled and mashed with water. Then aspergillus fungi is added, creating the koji. This breaks down proteins and carbohydrates and begins developing the flavor of the soy sauce. After 3 to 7 days, salt and water are added to create what is called the muromi, and the mixture is further fermented with lactobacillus and yeast, which thrive in salty and sugary environments. After several months, the mixture is ready to be filtered, pasteurized, bottled, and sold.
Kimchi is an extremely important to the Korean culture and thought to have been the basis for many of the fermented foods in the East Asian culture. It's used in its diplomacy and even as a cultural representation along with its music. The lactic acid bacteria that forms in the fridge that develops after the paste is put onto the cabbage transforms the cabbage into a crisp leaf into a softer texture with wonderful flavor in a process that takes about 3 months. And as it sits in the jar in the fridge over those 3 months, these bacteria develop the flavor and texture of the kimchi, and the longer it sits, the more flavor and texture develops.
Miso is a soybean paste, and it's used as seasoning in a lot of different dishes like miso soup. It's very popular in Japan where it originated. And the way it's made starts out similarly to soy sauce. So a fungus called aspergillus, specifically in this case, Aspergillus oryzae, it's allowed to grow on rice where it's then called koji. And then it's mixed with crushed soybeans, and the koji produces enzymes that break down proteins and carbohydrates in the soybeans and the rice. Later, yeast and lactic acid bacteria are added, and they use the simpler macromolecule subunits that are now available. So they use the amino acids and simple sugars to create lactic acid, alcohols, and certain pigments. And all of these things react together over a course of several months, depending on what kind of miso you want.
So moving on to the Central and Southern Asian region, kombucha is a fermented carbonated sour drink known for being an excellent source of probiotics. Tea and sugar are mixed and a SCOBY, which stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, is added to the room temperature sweetened tea. The kombucha then ferments in a dark, warm room for roughly 10 days. The SCOBY is then removed and the mixture is strained, and the kombucha is then ready to be consumed. The two primary fermented things in kombucha are acetic acid bacteria and yeast, and the types of these bacteria depend on the region in which the SCOBY is being made.
So for the fermentation of kefir, milk is pasteurized through a heating and cooling process, and after that, the kefir grains are added. The milk and kefir grains are incubated for a period of 18 hours at 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, which is best for the microbes. During this time, the microbes from the kefir grains transform the milk into this tangy and yogurt-like drink. The microbes contributing to the sour taste through their lactic acid are Lactobacillus kefiriniferans, leuconostotic mesenteroids, and Lactobacillus helveticus. After incubation, kefir grains are separated out and the kefir is packaged to be sold in stores across the world.
Idli is a rice cake from South India, which is a great source for vitamin B, fiber, and iron. Semolina and black lentils are made into a batter, which is placed in the oven for fermentation overnight. During fermentation, the microbes Leuconostoc mesenteroides and Streptococcus thermophilus give idli its fluffiness and texture. After fermentation, a pinch of salt is added to the batter. The batter is then poured in the greased molds, which is then put in a steamer. The steamer is turned on for 10 minutes on medium-high. This idli is taken out and cooled for 2 to 3 minutes and then enjoyed.
Now for the European fermented foods. Cinnamon rolls are made from the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or as we all know it, active dry yeast. And when the dough rises, the yeast feeds off the glucose from the flour and sugar to grow and produce waste products, which in turn adds flavor and helps the dough rise. The cinnamon roll is believed to be from Northern Europe and is culturally significant in Sweden because it's commonly enjoyed during fika, a term meaning a person takes a break in their day to enjoy coffee and pastries with friends and family. This is also a common treat that is commonly enjoyed during Christmas.
So the fermented food I chose is salchichon, and it is basically the Spanish version of salami with wine and nutmeg mixed in. Though it originated in northern Spain, the Spanish culture as a whole has kind of taken it in as their own. The process starts by combining the salts, wine, meat, fat, sugar, and spices to a bowl and mixing them together. The meat is then fermented for about 2 to 3 months until the lactic acid can do its job and produce the sausage that you see here in the slideshow. Salchichon is known for staying the exact same over the generations and being a tasty treat to any occasion.
Olives, the Greek method. The Greek method uses pickling salt and ferments the olives for 2 to 3 months. It is a lactic acid fermentation, so it relies on Lactobacillus pentosus, Lactobacillus plantarum, and yeast. However, yeast is less important since it slightly contributes to the flavor. Olives symbolize peace and fertility, and they are quite significant in the Mediterranean culture. In the early 1700s, olives grew in popularity in the United States when olive trees were introduced to California. Olives encouraged America to embrace the Mediterranean culture and way of life.
The method of fermenting olives is one of the most classic methods. When you think about fermentation, you make a brine and you take your olives and put them in a jar together. After multiple weeks, they will go through a transformation from being hard and very bitter to much softer with a nice, palatable, tangy flavor, and they're ready to be jarred and sold.
Fermentation is present all throughout the world. More than simply letting food rot, it is a transformation into something new and wonderful. From soy sauce in Asia and olives in Europe to pito in West Africa and pozole in Mexico, fermentation can be found all across the world. Microbes often get a bad rap because they can cause sickness, such as the microbe E. coli. However, microbes are all over. We have microbes inside of our bodies, on our skin, and in our food. While some microbes can cause illness, others are able to prevent these illnesses. The microbes in our bodies are there to protect us. They help us digest food and prevent foreign microbes from entering our system. Microbes also help us to make tasty food. Fermentation is the change that a food goes through when influenced by specific microbes. It takes certain conditions to make sure that the right microbes come to the ferment, such as a proper temperature, humidity, and a strict microbe feeding schedule. Despite all the specifics needed for a good ferment to take place, microbe cultures are resilient. When they find a niche that they wish to occupy, those specific microbes take over. You can even drop a jar of sourdough starter on the floor, rejar it, and the microbes will still be fine. We've talked a lot about how bacteria needs a specific environment to grow and thrive, and how that related to us as students. How our environment affects our ability to grow, and the importance of living in conditions conducive to success. Our community and culture can help us thrive, especially when conditions may not be as optimal for our growth. Another important thing to consider is that we are resilient. One poor grade or a bad day is not going to stop us from reaching our goal. We will survive, and we will come out on the other side stronger for it. With our own strength and the strong KU community supporting us, we will achieve our dreams.